Good evening and welcome to this Tuesday, June 19th, 2018 meeting of the Raymore Planning and Zoning Commission. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Let me remind you, please make sure your microphone is lighted and speak into the microphone for the record. We'll call roll. Commissioner Wiggins.
Present.
Commissioner Armstrong. Commissioner Bowie. Commissioner Crane.
Present.
Commissioner Fizer.
Present.
Commissioner Meiske.
Present.
Commissioner Urquia.
Present.
Mayor Turnbow.
Present.
Commissioner Faulkner is present, and we do have a quorum. No personal appearances this evening. One item on the consent agenda, which is acceptance of minutes from our June 5th, 2018 meeting, and unless any of the commissioners have concerns about the minutes, I would accept either a motion to accept consent agenda or a motion to accept minutes from June 5th, 2018.
So moved. Second.
Okay, not that we're in a race here, but, oh, on the first on the second. All right. Motion by Commissioner Urquia, second by Commissioner Crane. And I forget, which motion was that? To accept minutes or to accept consent? Whichever. Yes.
To accept the minutes, yes.
To accept minutes. All those in favor, raise a hand, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I got 5 in favor. Any opposed and abstentions?
1.
2 abstentions who were not here for the meeting. Okay.
That's right.
And minutes are accepted. We have nothing this evening under old business. And one item under new business, which is a review of projects completed in, well, I don't know, is it the past year or 2017? I guess it's probably the past year, right? So staff, Mr. Carteret, Mr. Gress, if you'd like to present this review, we will be happy to listen.
Thank you, sir. As you mentioned, tonight we are here to review a handful of projects that have been approved and completed under the authority of the Planning and Zoning Commission within the last couple years. So similar to the way we review the Growth Management Plan and the Unified Development Code every year to just ensure that it's up to date with current planning trends. Tonight we're here to review previous projects to see if they were approved as they were presented to you all during the planning process. And to take a look at whether the contents of our Unified Development Code are being applied in the correct way, and that the items within that code are there to ensure that quality developments are being produced throughout the city of Raymore. So staff has put together a little package of 6 different projects that have been approved over the last couple of years. So for the format of this, I just kind of like to go through each one of these projects one by one. I don't want to go through each image one by one and make you guys follow like that, but I'll kind of touch on a couple things about the project to get you all thinking about kind of what maybe the conversation was during that process. And if there's things that you all have noticed that you like about the building or things that you don't like, things about the site that work well as far as traffic circulation, pedestrian circulation, things along those lines that work well or things that don't. That's kind of what we're here to talk about tonight. To make sure that, like I said, that things in our code are producing the highest quality developments possible. So if you flip to page number 3 of the report, the first building we're going to look at is the Remington Commercial Building, which is also known as the Lonnie Branson Building, State Farm Insurance Building, right there off of Remington Plaza and 58 Highway. So the multi-tenant commercial building was approved back in 2015, and one of the things that really make you kind of remember the process. This is actually one of the first buildings that we approved that actually allowed the front of the building to be a little bit closer to the front property line than would typically be allowed by our code. So the standard front setback for a commercial property would be 30 feet. However, under our code, under some of the provisions in that code, it allowed that to be reduced to be pushed up a little bit closer to 58, provided there was no parking in between. I believe there had to be maybe some additional landscaping in between, just to improve it a little bit aesthetically. But as far as circulation, the overall appearance of the building, building materials, and signage, I've included a handful of pictures that show different elevations of the building, different landscaping features, some of the signage that's included on the building, the sidewalks and parking lot, as well as the dumpster enclosure that's included on the property, and as well as a picture of one of the stormwater BMPs that was included as part of the development as well. So there's several good things about this property. It's definitely one of the nicer projects that we've had, I think, in the city as far as the completion of the project and overall maintenance. I mean, it's very well taken care of, and overall, I think it was a very quality project. But I'd be interested to hear if there's anything that you all have noticed over the last couple of years since the project has been completed that maybe didn't turn out the way we had all expected, or if there's anything that might have been changed throughout the review process.
Commissioners? I will say my initial reaction was kind of, oh my, what have we done? It certainly was a change. It was very close to the highway. The fact that there's a right turn lane there probably makes it appear a little closer actually to the pavement than it would without that right turn lane. But I completely agree with you. It's a great looking building. I think today, my concerns pretty much put to rest. I think that it would not be so obvious that it's different if we had more development with that same rule of not having the parking be what you see from the highway. And so I understand the concept, think it's a good concept, especially with a great looking building. When I look, and I don't think we've got the photo here, but when I look at Country Club Bank to the east, Country Club Bank, the styling obviously was done by different architectural firms. I don't think they're exactly matched in terms of facade, whatever, but I don't think that looks bad. I think we like the variety. Country Club Bank, actually, if I remember right, does not have, well, it has some parking on the south side, but not going clear across the building to the corner. Both the south and the east sides do not have parking, and I like that setback from the intersection. So I guess going forward, my only concern about a building of this particular style built very close to the highway right-of-way would be, if it were on a corner, I think I'd have some other concerns about sight lines, things like that. I don't know that we've probably got something in code in a separate provision about sight lines, and I suppose those two would work together with the more restrictive governing.
Yes, I do believe that's correct. The setbacks, where they're at, an intersection or corner lot versus an interior lot, those setbacks would obviously look a bit different. And then to speak to your point about the difference in the buildings and the materiality and the facades, they're certainly, quite a bit different in their appearance, but together they still kind of work together pretty well. And you don't notice one a little bit more than you do the other. They kind of work together very well. Yeah. And then to your comment about having more buildings along this area with them pushed forward, to touch on a previous project that we approved earlier last year, the Discover Vision, which is
right.
Back up and under construction right now. If I remember correctly, I believe that building is pushed a little bit closer to the front of the lot as well. I don't think it's quite as close as this building, but right. Again, there's definitely not a sea of parking in front of that building that you're going to see as you're driving along 58.
And I agree, that'll be interesting. It seems like that was in a lull for a very long time, and so I'm interested to see how it pans out. Yeah, okay. Other commissioners, comments? Mr. Gress, it's back to you.
Great, thank you. The second site we'll look at is the Taco Bell, right there off of Johnston Drive and 58 Highway. That was approved back in July of 2015, so shortly after the previous project. So I've included the approved renderings that were presented to you all during that process, as well as the site plan as it was presented, as well as a 2018, the most recent aerial photograph that we have. Impressively, you know, this is one of the ones that was completed, I think, as close as possible to the approved drawings as you can get. As you look at the renderings versus the actual pictures, it's pretty much one and the same. One of the things, just looking back through the staff report, since I wasn't here during the development of this project, just reading back through the comments and talking with staff, one of the things that I think was a topic for this development was the drive-through lane, the lack of the escape lane, if you will. I'm not sure the proper term for it, but just that secondary access to get out of the drive-through lane if there were an emergency or you found yourself not wanting to order your tacos after you would order them. Certainly, the location of the site and the size of the site altogether, I think, kind of limited that. We have a couple other spots in the city where we have similar situation without that drive lane. Just in experiencing that and looking at how people go through that, I don't think it's an issue, people not being able to get out, but I'd be curious to hear your all's feedback. Like again, I've included several pictures of what the building looks like, the facade, the landscaping, the trash enclosure. Just be curious what your all's opinion would be of this project.
Right, and Mr. Gress, I think that was a very accurate recollection since you weren't here, but yeah, that was pretty much the one key thing that I remember. A lot of discussion on the case. Personally, I don't really have an opinion, so I don't know if any of the other commissioners go through the Taco Bell drive-through there to.
Yeah, I do, in fact. And the only complaint I would have, it would be more for Taco Bell than for the planning itself without having that escape lane is a few times they haven't been able to take credit cards.
Oh.
And so when the credit card machine is down, if there's no sign before you pull into that, then you are stuck. And so that's happened a few times. But again, I think if that's just a matter of Taco Bell communicating better, having a sign up that says, hey, you know, before you pull in, cash only or something. Because, yeah, it is kind of frustrating to pull in there and then be like, well, now I'm stuck.
Yeah.
And I have to wait for the people in front of me to go through before you can get out. Not that there was an emergency, but just,
Yeah.
annoyance. But again, I think that can be resolved by better communication on Taco Bell's part as opposed to the
Right.
planning process itself, if something like this was to occur again in the future.
I don't know that we'd want to actually include it in code. I know there are other drive-throughs, McDonald's in particular comes to mind, but, I'm probably kind of blurring between Belton and Raymore. I know there are other drive-throughs where there are duals. I imagine you could probably still get stuck in one of those too, but, I think the comment.
The McDonald's still have a side lane around the two lanes of drive-through that you can
right.
still get around if you're not going through the drive-through.
Well, it seems like if the lot permitted, that would definitely be a good consideration. I'd kind of feel like it would be a should rather than a shall. Excuse me. Oh,
Well, do you want to?
yeah,
Okay.
I'm curious. Anything you can share with us?
Oh, we were just looking at the Taco Bell and Burger King in Belton,
Oh,
and they don't have escape lanes either.
that Taco Bell
So
doesn't.
it's,
Yeah.
no. So like I said, it's not a huge, I don't think it's to your point, I don't think it's something we need to change in the code. I think it maybe just, if we're gonna approve something like that, letting the owner know, hey,
Right.
if you ever have anything that might create an issue for people, put up a sign or something to let them know.
Well, so here's the thing, Mr. Catarat, myself, probably Commissioner Crane, undoubtedly remember sign code, and you don't turn a battleship in a second. It's typically with trying to make things better, trying to do better. You set a course, and as new projects come along, you try to include the latest thinking or the latest amenities in those new projects. So.
Well, and I'm not talking about like a street sign or a big, I'm just
No.
talking like a piece of paper slapped on the
Oh,
little,
oh, no.
all
I
slapped
know.
on their little thing right there that just says cash only right now.
No, I'm not suggesting that Planning and Zoning Commission have anything to do with the credit card machine, but, you know, site plans, certainly from a standpoint, you know, I think our top priorities are probably safety, security ranks high in there. After that, we get into, you know, trying to keep things from being monotonous or tacky in the case of maybe metal, old style metal siding, things like that. But I certainly think it would be reasonable for site planning to, well, we do look at traffic flows. So I think in terms of not trapping somebody in a single lane, I don't see why that's not a valid consideration. Future discussion. Commissioner Crane?
I was one of the ones that was really worried about going through the drive-through and the parking and all of that, but, you know.
Oh, Mike, light him up, thanks. Go.
Yeah, it's on.
Go. Please continue, sorry, we're
Okay.
messing.
Lost my train of thought. No, I was concerned about it at the time, but I sit over in the Price Chopper parking lot a lot, waiting on my wife. And I've watched it go through there at all times of day, at dinner time and things like that, and it doesn't seem like they have any problems over there. Traffic moves well in and out of there, they get parked, so, you know, a lot of the concerns I had, they kind of just faded away once I saw the operation, you know, going on.
Mr. Caterat?
I do, kind of following up on Commissioner Crane's comment, I was curious, one of the other things that came up in site plan review was there's somewhat of a limited distance before the menu board. I mean, it met code, but I think some commissioners were concerned that the traffic would back up into the main entrance aisle for Price Chopper. I have not seen that. You've seen that?
I've not seen
How-
it.
I have experienced that as well, where you're basically in the Price Chopper parking lot. Now, you don't have to, you're not on the main little entranceway
Okay.
or whatever, because you pull around and you come through, but you're cutting through the parking lot
Is it-
to be in line.
That's what's happening? And
Yeah,
Does
if
that
it-
happen
if-
often, or is it just really?
Maybe a couple times. Not
Okay.
that I'm a frequenter of Taco Bell or anything, but
No,
Was the parking stacked up that made it a problem, or was the parking lot
no, it
pretty
was
empty when it happened?
the drive-through. I mean, there was parking, but you know, most people don't, you know, like with kids, you don't want to get out of the car. You just want to go through the drive-through. It's
Right,
easier. But
right.
like I said, it's only happened a couple of times. But to the point, you know, when they're taking credit cards, it moves pretty quickly. So there's really not a huge, you know. But yeah, a few times I've been in line in the parking, you know, basically in Price Chopper parking lot, waiting for the line to move. But
We knew it was gonna be tight, because that was the main entrance coming off, you know, to get into, we knew there wouldn't be
Yeah.
a tremendous amount of stacking.
so I actually am a pretty much weekly regular at Price Chopper, and I do always park on that side of Price Chopper's lot. And I guess one good thing is I don't remember that I've ever seen the Taco Bell patrons and the Price Chopper patrons actually parking together. There's always a little bit of open space kind of between the two groups of cars. So it does seem to work out reasonably well. If it were tighter, yeah, I think we might have concerns both about blocking a traffic aisle and maybe not having enough shared parking. But from my experience, you know, mainly patronizing Price Chopper, it seems to work out well. And Price Chopper itself, you know, the tendency is always to park closer to the door. So if it's really busy, you know, it's never been a problem to find spaces up toward the highway.
One other comment, just that staff made on this particular side, and I think it's a combination of, this is a corporate Taco Bell, so I think the approach was a little bit different, but what stands out to us is the landscaping of this Taco Bell. It really is they really did a nice job. And from our standpoint, the preservation of existing trees helped this overall site. So I think that was something we did very well in making them work around the existing trees. But for Taco Bell, again, not comparing to Belton's, but when you look at, you know, it's a sea of asphalt concrete around the one in Belton, where I think this one really stands out. Just, it's still an obvious, you know, corporate Taco Bell building. You know it when you see it, but the landscaping kind of really jumped out at us. So I think that's something for us to think about when we look at other projects as well. If we can preserve trees like what we did with Culver's, we did very well
yeah.
on that site.
Yeah,
I think
on
it's
the
something
east.
that we really need to look at.
Well, the other thing, and, you know, I know we're not gonna get away from pavement. I personally still, am not a fan of 9-foot wide parking spaces. I liked them better in the old days when they were 10, because it doesn't matter that a lot of cars have gotten smaller. There's still a lot of big trucks, big Suburbans and Tahoes in the neighborhood. And so on the one hand, you know, I like a parking lot that's got plenty of room for the big vehicles. On the other hand, I don't like all the impervious surfaces. So I hope as time goes forward, I hope that we can look more and possibly pioneer more use of the pervious pavers, things like that. And, you know, that probably creates its own issues in terms of all the weeds and stuff that would love to grow through them, but I still think there's room for less pavement. And I do agree with you all on the landscaping. That is a nice looking facility. I think there's still a few outlots on the Price Chopper property yet to develop, so hope we get to revisit this in a couple of years and see some further development, see how it works in. Commissioner Meiske?
I just want to make this part of the record, because Commissioner Anderson and I really had a concern with the single lane, the no escape route. If something happens in that lane where they're not taking credit cards, it's backed up, how does an ambulance get to somebody in a car that's having a heart attack, a baby, whatever? And I think that was our biggest concern, is there's no way of getting to a car that's 2 spots away from paying, you know, and so,
I think you're gonna be on foot.
well,
Close.
well-
Close parking, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you're on
Or on the
if you're on
street.
Johnson Drive, you're 10 feet away from the drive-through lane.
Yeah, you
Right.
10 foot.
You just literally could walk across the grass, but if future projects, that may not be the case.
Well, and
yeah, that's what our concern was with this, knowing that we couldn't change it because it was already gonna be approved. However, if it comes up again, I think there was some lot restrictions that they couldn't go any wider or something like that. But, you know, if it's got that capability, we'll like to see that. I would, that escape route.
I mean, obviously Johnson was right there, but if you look at Panda Express, it backs up to Golden Corral, so there is not an immediate roadside access through that single lane. So
Right.
that is a very valid comment for the
Well, and I think, don't we depend on South Metro Fire to also review access to buildings? So we're leaning on them if they have concerns about being able to get fire equipment in. I think that's going to address some of our concerns. If they don't, then, yeah, we're probably worrying more than we need to, would be my take. But still good, you know, definitely something to keep an eye on going forward. Other comments on Taco Bell? Okay, Mr. Gress.
Great comments. The third site that we'll look at is the Raymore Market Center, a little bit more recent project. It was approved back in June of 2017 and was completed late last year. This is the multi-tenant commercial building, which has the K Jewelers, Firehouse Subs, among others, the Mod Pizza. Very nice looking building, in my opinion. Complied very well with a lot of our design standards and was kind of one of the more first modern-looking buildings, I guess you could see in comparison to what some of the other buildings look like here throughout the city. Some of the things I think that work well about this site, the building overall I think is sited very well right there on the corner. It's very prominent. In addition to the sculpture that was placed there soon after the building was completed, I think it really ties the site all together. Parking isn't really an issue. One of the topics that we often go back to is the access right there off of from the site onto 58. Turning left out of there isn't always easy, as it's doable sometimes, but it can also cause traffic to back up there for people trying to make that left turn out of the parking lot. Pedestrian access to the site was a little bit of a challenge due to the different grade level from 58 down to the site, but they definitely found ways to make it happen. It's a little bit indirect and not the most accessible route by any means, but it's good to still have that pedestrian access from 58 down to the site. The first aspect of this would be the multi-tenant commercial building, and then the Qdoba. Those were kind of approved together, and then the Panda Express came separately. So we'll talk about the Panda Express here in just a minute. I'd just be curious. I know there's several. There's restaurants, there's retail, a different mix of different uses in here, but I think they all work together with the. I've got outdoor patio seating for one restaurant and another, versus K Jewelers, which doesn't need that. But I think overall that those different uses work together very well. Access to the site and circulation works out very well. So again, several pictures. One of the things that kind of caught my attention was on page 17. You'll see the monument sign that's located right there on the entrance off of 58. The building is pretty well full. There's one tenant space left. And I think they're kind of closing in on a tenant there here pretty quickly. But one thing that caught my attention is that Mod Pizza is the only tenant that has chosen to put a sign on that monument sign right there. They've got wall signs on all of the buildings that are occupied, but Mod is the only tenant who has chosen to utilize space on that sign. There might be plans for them to do that in the future. They just haven't gotten around to it yet with their opening and things like that. It was just one thing that kind of caught my attention was the lack of. We always hear about the importance of signs for businesses and drumming at business, and then the prime opportunity to have some advertisement there on 58, and they're just not taking advantage of it. So I'd be curious to see what your kind of thoughts are on the design of the building. Like I said, it's a little bit more modern than what you typically see here so far. So I'd be curious to see what your opinions and thoughts are on this building.
Yeah, Commissioner Wiggins.
Although I was not on the commission at the time, but one of the things that I like about it, not only the modern look of it, but when you drive around our town and others, a lot of developments that would be similar to this in nature of a multi-commercial space, they tend to be very flat, very rectangular box of, just it's one big Lego block that's been put down. And so I really appreciate the different textures, different colors, different materials. You've got the different heights and elevation change. You've got stone, you've got stucco, you've got glass. So personally, I just like that it looks almost like 5 separate buildings have been built together, as opposed to, you drive to some other shopping malls and it's literally just one square or rectangular block that they just put some doors in. So I really appreciate that, and I hope that other developers and designers choose to utilize similar elements like this, because it does improve the visual appeal of it.
Yeah, Commissioner Pfizer.
I remember when they brought this to us, and I remember asking them if they were going to try and save any trees. And they said that they would try, and probably within a month, the place was just totally mowed down. I thought, yeah, nice job there. But I was really kind of horrified, too, to have the house and the barn torn down, because it's like when we first moved here, that's the first thing you see. But I have to admit, I really do love this place, and I love to go to Mod Pizza and Firehouse Subs and Qdoba. Panda Express I could live without, but I think it's a beautiful building. My only real complaint is when you drive in off of 58, if you try to make that right, I'm pointing to it, which doesn't help you guys, but if you're driving in and you take an immediate right, like in front of Qdoba, that seems like a really tight turn into there. It seems like people, if someone's coming out, they're always kind of in the middle. And that's the only thing, it just always feels really tight there. So usually I don't even turn there. I go around and park in the back because it's just easier to get in and out there. But that's the only thing. And I wish that I love the sculpture, but I wish there was more green space around it because it kind of feels like it's attached to the stores, and I wish it had a little more prominence because I think it looks really nice. Yeah, I think I mentioned that to the Arts Commission, that wouldn't it be nice to put some trees behind it, but there's not really a lot of space. But I do think it's great, and when I drive past it, I am, impressed with the way it looks, and it does look cool and modern and matches the drawings, and so I do like it. So I'd give it a thumbs up.
Commissioner Wiggins.
Well, I'd just be curious, and it's probably more of a question for you, that the comment about the turn, is it the elevation change that probably leads to that, since it's kind of a downhill that maybe people take more of a gradual turn? I just happen to be looking at Google Maps on the street view, and you can actually see the tire treads go wide of the yellow line on all of them, so people are more turning into the middle turn lane as opposed to the right turn. So I just didn't know if that had something to do with the elevation change, and is that something that in the future, if we do have a big change like that, could incorporate a wider turn lane or something? I don't know. Obviously, that's more up your guys' alley, or somebody from the engineering or planning, as opposed, or with more of a technical background.
It's probably more a factor of speed than it is of anything else.
Yeah.
Comment?
Just
Commissioner Kia?
I know that when you're coming across that, when you're going eastbound and you come through the light, and then you realize, oh, that's where Firehouse Sub is, and you're going 40 miles an hour to then brake and make that turn, is probably what's causing most of that, more so than the actual elevation change, just from what I've witnessed. But
Right. So I'm kind of all over the scale on this. Overall, I definitely give it a thumbs up. No question about that. I love the sculpture. Some days I actually wish there was more wind, but I love the sculpture. They've got that damp just enough. I like the buildings. I think it works very well. I still do not like Old Kentucky Road on the north side of 58, and mainly because, sometime late last week, early this week, here's somebody going eastbound trying to turn left onto Kentucky, and they don't get over into the center lane. They block the driving lane, and so that's probably the main reason I don't like this intersection. But if I don't like it, I'm just really not going to like anything about it. I am still really unhappy with the developers, I'll say, that we weren't able to get a better access from the from the south side Galleria into this. I'm certainly pleased that the little sneak path through Golden Corral worked. That saved it. Without that, I think it would have been a mess. With it, yeah, it works. It's a little bit twisted. The other thing that I think is kind of interesting about this, so let's see. I guess I'm actually on the photographs on page 16 and 17, and this is a little bit leveraging our discussion about the whatever we called it, the Matt Davidson building or the Lonnie Branson building, sorry. But, when you look at the north side of the multi-tenant building, that's perfectly logical. It's kind of similar in concept, at least, to the building to the west with Sherwin-Williams and et cetera. So you've got parking there, and this is, I'm going to call it a little bit old school again, parking there between the highway right away and the front of the building. That part works, makes sense, but then you have additional parking on the backside. So you go to the photo at the top of page 17, and I actually there's a similar type of building that this reminds me of out in Torrance, California, which you could say, what does that have to do with Raymore? But I think on that one, you can actually come into the, and I don't remember if it's a subway or what, but you can actually come into it from either side. And there's actually, as I recall, there isn't any parking on the highway side, which is actually the entrance. So it's kind of weird, but you know, maybe the good thing about having some of the parking in front, some in back, is none of it's really a long distance to walk. But looking at the photos, particularly tonight, the parking on what I'm going to call the back side, the south side of the multi-tenant building, just seems kind of like, yeah, how does that work?
You can actually enter the Firehouse Sub and the Mod Pizza from the south side.
Good.
It's only K, which makes perfect sense that they don't want multiple entrances to a jewelry store
no.
for easy in and outs.
Okay.
But yeah, the two restaurants you can get in and out of on
Okay.
both sides.
Well, that is good to hear then.
Because I'll be honest, like you, I park on the south side when I go here to go into Firehouse or wherever I'm going to eat. And
So now you know the truth, and I have actually eaten in Qdoba, but I've not yet eaten in Firehouse and Mod, and so those are on my list.
but now you know you can enter through the south
Good.
side.
Oh, that makes more sense, so thank you for sharing that. I agree with the other comments, and overall, you know, it works. I'm very pleased with it. Other comments? Yeah. All right, Mr. Grass.
One thing I'll add that I was almost sure that I included a picture of it, but it seems to have been thrown out in the process. But if you've been to the site recently at all, or within the last couple of months, you'll notice, so they have, on the south side of the property in between the multi-tenant building and Qdoba, they've got their trash enclosure with their dumpster. But what they've added in the last several months is a recycling container, which is not screened like a typical dumpster would be required to. It's just simply sitting in one or two parking spaces, and it's labeled for recycling only, for the tenants. So what we've talked about internally, you know, by code, they're not required to screen it because it's, by nature, it's not a trash receptacle, it's a recycling receptacle. So we've been kind of on the fence as, well, how do you classify that? It's by code, it's not, and then you start looking at other locations with the Price Chopper across the street, they have their Ripple Glass, you know, recycling container, which is also not required to be screened. So we would just be interested to hear your thoughts on that. You know, should all, you know, refuse receptacles be required to be screened, or should we differentiate between trash receptacles and recycling? Is there a difference between the two? One thing we've talked about, the difference between, I think, this site's recycling container and the one at Price Chopper, is that this one is really designed to serve the tenants and the users of the site, whereas the Ripple Glass is more of a community asset, if you will.
Yeah.
You know, it's available for anybody in the community to come use. So far, I mean, that's the one distinction between, I think, those two recycling containers. But
Right.
I'd be curious to hear your all's thoughts on the requirement for screening of those.
It sounds like you've got a very thorough grasp on all of the pros, cons, and issues. I have no problem with the Ripple Glass recycling simply because of what it is. It's a community asset. I'm pleased that somebody manages to keep the area around it fairly clean. That hasn't always been the case, but you know, people are sloppy sometimes and glass breaks. But given the choice of having the recycling container not screened or not having the recycling container, hey, guess which way I'm gonna go? The recycling trumps the need for screening. But I think when you first mentioned that in terms of the multi-tenant building, it's kind of like, hey, it looks like a dumpster. It should be screened like a dumpster. So you all have agonized over this already, I can tell. Other comments, thoughts? Yeah, Commissioner Meiske.
Yeah, the Benton House, their recycling is behind the screen and everything. And I don't know if that was required by us or if they just came in and said that's what they were doing. I don't remember, but yeah, they have a trash and then they have a recycling. So, and I know it's behind the screen.
Other comments?
Yeah,
Mayor
I
Turnbow?
mean, from my perspective, from the city's perspective, now this is just the mayor talking here, but I think it should be screened, be frank with you. The use of 2 parking spots in an area where there's parking that's already precious to the tenants in that area. We've got one that just had a ribbon cutting today, spoke very highly of the architectural design of the building when I talked to the new tenants. They were talking to some folks about another project over in Olathe that they're going to put in, and they were hoping that they would replicate what we've done here. So they were very complimentary of that. And I think having that recycling container, while needed, is and sitting in parking spots is an inappropriate use of those parking spots. I feel like those types of containers should be screened in an appropriate spot. If you're talking about across the street, there's the potential of that being relocated should those pads out there be developed in the near future. So it's just there now as a public service, as was previously announced. So I, from my perspective, I would really like to see that screened and moved out of a parking spot, because that's a precious commodity in that area, especially if we're going to get that other tenant spot filled. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Mayor Turnbow. I'm sort of thinking, what would that be, the 27th Amendment to the UDC, or 28th? I've kind of lost count here, but yeah, that to me, that sounds worth pursuing at another Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. You know, we just went through our review of code, but any of the other commissioners feel real strongly one way or the other about wanting to screen recycling containers like trash containers? Commissioner Wiggins?
I definitely would be in favor of it. You know, even though on the side it might say recycling only, in driving by, a recycling dumpster looks just like a trash dumpster. So from a visual perspective, even though it might not have old food and beverages leaking out of it, it's still, you know, might not smell as bad as the item next to it.
Right.
Visually, I bet if you ask 9 out of 10 people would say they'd think it's a trash dumpster. So unless it was going to all of a sudden become a community commodity, where obviously we have curbside recycling, but unless all of a sudden you were inviting the community to use it, it probably should be behind, you know, some sort of screening, because it's for the strict use of that development.
And I agree that that's the distinction. So, you know, a lot of things have changed. We now have recycling as part of the trash service, which we have not always had, certainly. I can remember, if I could remember the name of the church just west of Freedom Stop, there used to be an Abitibi paper recycler there. I think there were actually 2 of them back kind of about halfway along the side of the church, and I think those needed to be publicly visible, and, you know, even on highway location, because that's how I knew they were there. I used those. I also used the one between the old Radio Shack and let's see, that would be Lord of Love Lutheran in Belton, which I think all of those now are gone. I don't know. I guess Abitibi found it no longer profitable to have those. But it seems like, picking up on Commissioner Wiggins' comment, the distinction would be if it's a publicly available recycling bin, something like that, it needs to be visible. That's kind of the opposite of screening. But if it's for the benefit of the business, like the dumpster, then it probably needs to be screened. And, you know, I certainly wouldn't be opposed to grandfathering any of those that are currently out there unscreened either, just to make it a little less of a burden on the business. Other commissioners? Sure, Commissioner Pfizer.
Would it be possible to, I mean, I like the idea of screening it too, but would it be possible to require everyone to have a trash dumpster and a recycling bin? That, you know, I mean, we can't force them to use it, but if you have it, you're more likely to use it. I mean, just as, is that infringing too much?
I'm a little squeamish about it myself. I feel like, let's take one step at a time, but of
Well,
course,
for
commission
future.
goes with majority opinion, so.
It just, seems like if it's kind of built in there already, just a thought.
Yeah, just
Commissioner
a
Wiggins.
comment to add to that. Two things. One, obviously, the developer or the landlord is paying for the cost of the service, so obviously they would incur a cost there. And having done some retail at a large shopping center that had both cardboard recycling in the back plus dumpsters, the vast majority of the businesses, as the employees are walking out, if they have the option of putting everything in one bin or separating it into two, they're all putting it in one. So the trash bin was always full and the recycling bin was almost never full because, the guy who's getting paid $8 an hour who has to take the trash out is probably not going to take the time to sort the boxes from the trash and vice versa. Obviously, that's not the case with everybody. Somebody like a restaurant might be easier to sort that kind of stuff, but
Yeah, that's where I was going to go and say, hey, in my previous life, I worked in restaurants, and you had your trash can, you had your, call it your cardboard box bin, and then you had your grease trap. And we did separate it. It made life a lot easier because, especially in a restaurant where you had a lot of trash, if you put your cardboard in with the trash, you run out of room very, very quickly. So whereas in a retail space, I'm sure it's a lot different. You have maybe a couple of trash bags, compared to a restaurant where you have lots and lots of trash. And I'm guessing that's probably what created the recycle bin at this is the restaurants that are there in the boxes that they had and not wanting to take up trash bin space with the cardboard. My only comment would be which obviously at every restaurant I worked at, it was enclosed with the trash. So it wasn't uncommon to see that. But the only thing I'm thinking here is if you had required that with the construction of that, knowing that restaurants might go in or that recycling was required, it probably would have taken up a couple of parking spaces anyway to create the area to put the recycle bin in. I'm sure aesthetically it's going to look a lot nicer to have it within the screened area as opposed to just out in parking lot spots. But a requirement or not, I think every business is different in its volume. Like we just mentioned, a restaurant's going to have a lot more trash and cardboard as compared to a retail space. So the type of business and the amount of trash it's going to generate. A small office building, I think the one we looked at before where you have a law firm and a insurance agency, I don't see them generating a ton of trash one way or the other, so to require two separate maybe overkill in that type of a situation. So I think being cognizant of what is going to be in the development would make a lot of sense, of then kind of determining what the requirement would be.
Yeah, I agree. And just kind of to reemphasize, my priority would be to facilitate recycling would be my top priority. Screening the recycling bin after that. So I would not want to require screening and discourage someone from having a recycling bin at all. Kind of a balance there.
The only thing I would add to that is that I know a lot of times if you don't have it screened in, whether it's private or public believe that they can use it because it's easily accessible for them. And so then what you end up is with the trash in your recycle bin because it's not screened in.
Messed up.
Anyway.
So the screening might be self-preservation for a business.
Yeah. And like I said, I think in this case, it's probably the lack of thought that restaurants might go in there and then the need for a cardboard box because you go through a lot of boxes in a restaurant and there's not, we have a lot of growth and people moving in, but people moving in don't need boxes, it's the people moving out. So we're in the rare situation where we have a lot more people moving into the town. So restaurants probably aren't giving out their boxes like some of the places where I worked where, you'd have people, they knew when your food trucks came in and they'd be in line waiting for you to bring the boxes out and take them off your hands for you. But otherwise, I'm guessing that's probably what triggered the need for a recycle bin there.
Okay. Thank you all. Other comments? Mr. Gress, if you will proceed very cautiously We'll talk about Qdoba next, right?
Thank you, sir. Right next door to the Mod Pizza and the rest of the multi-tenant building is the Qdoba restaurant. I think we've already talked about a lot of the issues and things that you've all noticed about the site overall, as far as traffic coming in and out of the site, trash enclosures, recycling enclosures. So maybe we can talk about this building. I think sticks out a little bit more, maybe more so than the multi-tenant building, just because the colors, they kind of incorporated some artwork into the building to make it look a little bit different. I think it turned out nicely, but it's definitely again something a little bit different than you would see in some of the older buildings that we have here in the community. So again, I've included pictures of all four sides, some of the artwork, kind of the metal sign, if you will, on the west kind of corner of the building. The outdoor patio seating, which is usually always full on a nice day when I go that way over lunch. So overall, I think the building looks nice. Like I said, we've already touched on some of the topics as far as the site overall, but I'd be curious to hear the commission's opinion on how the building turned out, how it looks, and some of the aesthetics of the building.
Commissioner Pfizer?
I think it looks great, and I love Qdoba. The food is wonderful. And their bathrooms are really kind of fancy. You should check those out if you're there. I hadn't been in there in a long time. My daughter's like, oh, go check out the bathroom. I'm like, okay. And it was really, really nice. So it's my little plug for their bathroom. But I think it looks really great. And anytime there's outdoor seating, I love it just because it seems more festive somehow. And I think the colors are good. And just overall, I'm really pleased with how it turned out.
Commissioner Williams? Sorry.
Just kind of a random question because I was not on the commission. The designs look to be like the building was maybe intended to be larger than the physical one that's built. Obviously, things change from the drafting board to the actual construction. I just was curious, for instance, they had the rear view that shows the door and a large mural across the back, but then when you actually look at the physical one, it seems a lot more narrow. So I just didn't know if was there ever anything that their designs were larger, intended, like the front elevation, you've got the double glass windows, and then you move over and you've got 6 windows, including a full door on the I guess it'd be the western elevation, west elevation there, and then you actually look at the physical one, it's quite a bit smaller. I just didn't know if there was some changes that occurred in between there. Obviously, like I said, going from artist and architectural rendering to physical building, things change, but it just looks like the final product was smaller. Is that a true observation, or just happens to be just the way that it looks?
I think one of the things you might be noticing are your eyes playing tricks on you with the drawings on page 19, kind of enlarged a little bit to kind of fill up the page. But one of the things I've kind of noticed just in looking at this is, I think some of the reasons that the windows might have shifted, the building might look smaller, is what you're not seeing in the renderings is the outdoor patio area, the screening of that, the railing that's required, and some of the landscaping. So maybe to incorporate some of that, and the landscaping around the patio, they had to shift some of those elements of the building, the length of the windows, the width, and what have you over. I'm not aware, I wasn't with the city when this project was approved, but I'm not aware of any changes to the site plan or the size of the building. I don't know if Mr. Ketterick can clarify that for me, but I just wouldn't be aware of that myself.
No problem. It was nothing of importance, obviously there were things that were different from the final versus what the plan images show.
Commissioner Urquia?
And then, am I looking at this correctly, that the trash enclosure, which in the renderings is attached to the building, is now off to the south, correct? Because in the actual pictures, I don't see the trash enclosure attached to the building, nor do I see a picture of it.
It might be there at the left in the photo on the bottom of page 20. I'm not quite positive.
Yeah, on the left side of
If you look back to
east elevation.
page 15 that showed the approved site plan for the entire area, you can kind of see it kind of in the lower southeastern corner of the building. It's kind of tucked away on the very southeastern corner of the building itself.
Okay.
So, couple of observations, and again, I'll give this a big thumbs up. I like the wall art. I think that's a nice touch. I probably have seen 1 or 2 other Qdobas around the country, but I don't remember them real well. So I like the wall art. I think I'm hoping I'm correct, that doesn't count as a sign, correct? And I like that. I wouldn't want to disturb that. One thing I find interesting, and it wasn't so obvious until I'm comparing the drawing with the photograph, but the drawing of east elevation on the bottom of page 19 doesn't show all the utility boxes. The photo on the bottom of page 20, you know, you could make those utility boxes disappear some if they were painted compatible color with the building, and you know, maybe at some point in time that will happen, but you know, it's really intriguing. If that were the back side of the building, I wouldn't have a bit of a concern, but when you think about it, that side faces Panda. And so when you look at the overall development with, if I'm looking correctly, you know, you got all those utility boxes on a face of the building that you're actually going to see, I think, pretty prominently when you're over in Panda's lot. It's kind of like, you know, not a big deal, but doesn't strike me as the ideal situation either.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I was just kind of discussing with Mr. Gress, the Mod Pizza, we did a good job of having them put up a screen decorative wall of their outside utility connections.
Right.
Did not do that with Qdoba. That should have been screened better than, well, it's not screened at all. There should have been some screening element as part of the Qdoba building.
Yeah.
It does stick out, you're correct.
Yeah, well, again, I don't want to try to change anything now, but I think the whole purpose of this evening's review is to learn going forward, and
Exactly.
certainly, you know, not a big deal, definitely not a showstopper, but an opportunity to learn.
And a lot of it is the color coordination, just the downspout on the back of the east elevation. It somewhat fits the building. It's the gray of the electrical
Right.
connections, boxes and that really is kind of jumping out at us. If they, maybe at the very least, had changed the color of them.
Yeah, and, you know, you buy them painted, why bother to paint them again? But at some later date, perhaps they will.
Yeah.
It's just an interesting observation, something to learn from. Other commissioners have comments about Qdoba? All right, Mr. Grass, let's go eat at Panda then.
Alrighty, the last one here at the Raymore Market Center would be the Panda Express. Was approved in November of 2016. As we mentioned, similar to the Taco Bell, I think this site also struggled with the overall size of the site, really limited its ability to incorporate one of those emergency access lanes if it were required. However, just in the couple times I've been here, I've never seen it back up, similar to what we talk about with Taco Bell. I think the length of the drive-through and kind of where the order board is placed at, I think, you know, the stacking of vehicles works very well. One thing that we were talking about here internally just a little bit before the meeting was, I mentioned the pedestrian access from 58 down to the site. Obviously a very large grade change that we talked about with the parking lot, but to accommodate the pedestrian access that was required by code, you kind of have this indirect kind of roundabout access to the site, which still works, but just presented a little bit more of a challenge to make that connection to the site. I haven't really paid attention when I drive by. I haven't really seen a lot of people use that, but I can imagine if somebody were, you know, needing to access that site from the sidewalk, whether they're walking or in a wheelchair, it's still, you know, good to make those connections despite any topographical challenges or any other challenges for the site. But overall, like I said, just more pictures of the site. This site also has the outdoor eating area, which I like as well. But overall, I think this project turned out very well and kind of fits very well with the architecture of the buildings that are right next door.
Commissioner Wiggins.
Sorry if this is a silly question. One thing that I noticed, Panda used concrete for their parking spaces, and everything else is asphalt to the west. Is there any particular reason? Was it just something they chose to do? do they pay for, like, is it like a corporate kind of thing where they paid, so they go ahead and invest the extra money due to the lifespan of concrete versus asphalt, et cetera?
I know the Qdoba and then the retail building done at the same time, same developer, preference of asphalt. The Panda Express was a kind of an outlot, it's separated out, so a different builder developer did that project. But yeah, I think that was just a choice of the owner.
Other questions, comments? Okay. Mr. Gress, I guess we're ready to talk about Centerview.
All right. Last but not least would be the Centerview Community Building, located right behind City Hall here, approved on June 19th, 2016, completed kind of early last year. Overall, a very nice looking building, a very good asset for the community. I think it's kind of been received very well. A lot of people from the community, homeowner associations, different community groups utilize that building very well. And I think it works really well for their for the events that they have. One of the other things that was very interesting about this building to me is that, you know, just by code of being in the circle, parking isn't allowed to be right up front. It's still right there off of Broadmoor, but it doesn't really take your attention away from the overall aesthetics of the building. It's still kind of hidden away, even though, you know, it's not really tucked away behind the building. So I think that worked out very well. Again, some of the landscaping around the building, the outdoor patio, I think was very nice. The landscaping on really all four sides turned out very nicely. And then again, to your point about the previous building with the utilities, one thing that I did notice about this building that didn't surprisingly catch my attention with one of the other properties was the utility box that's located right there on the south side. Perhaps some screening or maybe just some additional landscaping to kind of detract your attention away from that might have made that section of the building a little bit more appealing. But overall, I mean, this is a very nice looking building in my opinion. Like I said, very well received by the community. Circulation and parking works very well, especially with the increase in parking along the circle. Anytime that I've seen this parking lot fill up, there's always cars parked on the circle with easy access to the building, especially with the sidewalk that was completed recently. It really helps with the pedestrian circulation around the circle to the building, to and from City Hall. I think works really well. But I'd be curious to hear your all's thoughts if you had a chance to either utilize the building or go inside of it or park at the building and walk around the circle. I'd be curious to see kind of what your experience has been.
Commissioner Meiske?
I've not been in the building or around it, so sorry.
Okay. Commissioner Pfizer?
I've been to a couple of events there, and I think it's a really nice facility. The deck is really just beautiful, and I actually went to a paint and sip wine thing on the patio, and it was great, except that they needed more lights because it was in the evening and it got pretty dark. So I was in a good spot. I could still see my painting, but people on the edge, not so good. But it was really fun. But it's just a really nice facility, and it doesn't look that big, but it actually holds a lot of people. It's a lot bigger inside, and I think the kitchen facilities are really nice. Just the whole layout is done really well.
Other commissioners? Commissioner Kia?
Yeah, I've been in it a few times. It is an absolutely beautiful building, beautiful space. I think it was definitely needed for the community. Glad we did something along these lines. Only comment I would make other than that is on the top of page 30, the east elevation outdoor view. You can see it in that picture. The land, I know we talk about the landscaping, it's beautiful landscaping, but on that side where most people go in, it's not consistent, is how I would describe it. Like, you can even see it in the picture right there by the sidewalks. It looks like it's, matty grass, and then you have really nice green grass right behind it. And then just beyond that, I think it just kind of goes back to wildlife would be the way I would describe it, with the random artwork in between there that you don't see in any of the pictures. But that's the only thing that really kind of, if you want to call it a critique, and if that's my biggest complaint, obviously it's a well-done space, and definitely glad we have it.
And if my understanding is correct, I believe that was an issue with not only the type of grass that was planted, but also the irrigation and kind of how it was watered. We will be resodding that luckily in the future to make that look a little bit nicer, because you're right, as you're walking into this really nice looking facility, the first thing you see is, you know, a patch of dead grass and then some really nice looking grass, and then it is rather inconsistent. So just, you know, maybe paying attention to the type of grasses that are being planted, making sure that they're going to survive, you know, all the crazy weather that we have here in the Midwest, is something to pay attention to.
Yeah, Commissioner Wiggins.
Looking at the bottom image of page 27, that kind of indicates that it was supposed to be more of like the native prairie grasses on the side. So was that the plan, and it just kind of ended up being kind of a dead matted space? Or, because you said that the irrigation and sodding over there, so I guess I was curious if it was intended to be more of the native prairie, and it just didn't really grow in. It grew in as weeds, and just kind of was what was left.
There were two areas of the facility that were intended to be more native plantings. The area around the parking lot and the entrance to the back patio area, and then the actual side of the building, which is page 30, bottom, the south elevation. That was to be some native landscaping on that side of the building. So on the south elevation, the bottom of page 30, we are still working on getting the natives to grow there and caring for them. It just takes a few years for that to happen. Around the parking lot area, didn't turn out. We have gone in, put irrigation in, and we're waiting on a warranty of a couple of trees that died to be replaced. Once those get replaced, we're gonna go in and sod it just to match the rest of the nice turf area around the building, but we'll keep the natives, like I said, on the what would be the south elevation of the property. Just something we learned. It just didn't quite work out the way we wanted it to.
In the end, Mother Nature wins. So, like several other commissioners, I've been in the building a few times. I give it 2 thumbs up. I think it's a gorgeous building, very versatile, very comfortable. Mr. Grass, to your comment about, oh, there's another one of those gray utility boxes, where that is, you know, that really to me is kind of the back side of the building. So I don't have a problem with that. It's not obtrusive. And the only thing I really can't comment, and I'm glad Commissioner Pfizer did, you know, I walked out on the patio, I saw the random art, I thought, this is cool, but I've not really spent any time on the patio, so that maybe will come at another event or something. But the building as a whole, and the fact that smaller rooms are available for rent, very versatile building, very nicely done. I hope it's very well built and lasts a very long time. Other comments, commissioners? Yeah. I almost feel like we ought to give ourselves a round of applause for this. I'm pleased with how everything worked out in spite of some concerns, but I think, you know, this makes me happy. Let's try our best to keep up the good work going forward. Mr. Grass, Mr. Cataret, any closing comments on the review?
I think you pretty much covered it. You all had some really great comments. We were talking before, just trying to anticipate the types of questions that you all would be asking. You know, it's one thing if we don't have any questions, it maybe means we're doing everything right, or if there are questions, hopefully it doesn't mean we're doing anything wrong. But you all mentioned some really good points, things that we don't necessarily think about every time we look at a site plan. Answer some questions that we had on, you know, the screening of different types of trash receptacles, something like we've been kind of debating on over the last couple months. But overall, like you said, I think a lot of the projects that we've had over the last couple of years have turned out very nicely, have been pretty consistent with the plans that have been presented to you all. And anything that has really gone wrong, I think wasn't really intentional, but was more of a lesson learned and something to pay more attention to the next go around. So thank you all for your comments.
Yeah, thank you. Unless anybody else on the commission has comments about this, well, let's see. Next on our agenda would be City Council report. Mr. Cataret.
Yes, sir, thank you. I'll go ahead and go over the most recent meeting of council is back on June 11th. The council had quite a few development applications on their agenda. They did approve on second and final reading our 27th Amendment to the UDC, and that was regarding the accessory dwelling units, so that is not part of the code. They also approved on second reading an easement vacation as part of the Brightside Daycare campus facility. They also approved on first reading that final plat that had gone through the Planning Commission for that project. First reading, they did approve the rezoning for the, what is the Kirby Estates property. This is the Compass Health Facility. So they approved that rezoning application as well as a replat of that property. So second reading will be coming up on the 25th for that project. And then they also approved on first reading the 14th plat for Westbrook. So quite a few development applications on their agenda at that meeting. And again, second reading coming up for all those items at their 25th meeting.
Thank you. We'll tell Mr. Zer what a nice job you did. And if you would, let's roll on into staff report.
Staff report, looking at our schedule. We do not have any items scheduled for the July 3rd meeting, so I believe we discussed canceling that particular meeting.
Right.
We will have a meeting on July 17th. We'll actually at that meeting bring forward the 28th Amendment, so that will be the items that we discussed at our last Planning Commission meeting that we went over, UDC changes. So we've been going over the comments that you all made on the various items that we presented to you. So we'll be bringing that forward for public hearing on the 17th.
Okay.
We also have agenda items for your first meeting in August. That used to be, well, it is the election day, the first Tuesday in August, but the polling location's been moved over to Centerview.
Oh,
So we no longer have to cancel our meeting. So we will have an agenda item for action that evening as well.
so that's August which?
I think it's the 3rd.
I can't argue.
Thank you, August 7th,
Yeah,
yes.
thanks. We'll trust the
So we will
smartphone.
have a meeting that evening.
Yeah, good to know. A little planning ahead. Okay, please continue.
The last item I'm going to bring forward again, we talked briefly about it at the last meeting on the national conference, the National Planning Conference coming up in 2019. So we do want to get an individual. We won't be registering anything until the month of December, but just to start looking at calendars. This particular conference is from Saturday, April 13th to Tuesday, April 16th. Again, in San Francisco, so it's going to require probably travel Friday.
Okay.
But the conference only goes until noon on Tuesday, so usually you'll be able to, if you needed to fly back Tuesday, you could. So just, again, opening that up to commission members. It's not officially part of the budget. It is part of the budget request, but by the time budget gets to council in October, we'll know if it's included or not. It certainly has been for at least the last 12, 13 years, so.
I was going to say, remind them they owe us one for missing 2017 or missing 2018, but
Hold those funds back and we'll use them in
yeah,
2018.
I know how fiscal years work.
But just again, I'll keep reminding the commission, we would like to have a representative go to that conference.
Yep, that's good. Thank you. Appreciate that.
That concludes my report. If I
Yeah.
can turn it over to Mr. Rokos.
Yeah, Mr. Rokos, please.
I just have two things I wanted to report on. The first one is Johnson Drive. If you notice, it's from Dean to Darby. It's ready to be paved. And this, excuse me, as soon as the subcontractor is ready to go, that will be paved. And then the contractor will have some final grading and some seeding and mulch work to do, and that road will be completed. 155th Street, which I know everybody always asks about everywhere I go. The floor and the walls of the culvert have been poured, and so hopefully next week they're planning on pouring the ceiling to it. Then it'll have to sit for several weeks while the concrete gains strength, and then they'll be able to build the road over it, and we'll have the road back open again.
Great.
Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Anybody?
When you say several weeks, is that 2?
Unfortunately, usually say 28 days to get full strength, but we put cylinders there, so we'll break them after 2 and 3 weeks to see if it gets full strength. I know.
Yeah. All right, thank you, Mr. Rokos. I'll open the floor for public comment, and seeing no one from the public, I think we'll just move on to commission member comment. Give me a second here. Let's see. Oh, Vice Chair Pfizer, can I start with you?
Sure. Well, first, throw my name in for that San Francisco trip. I would love to go, but if someone else wants to go, I understand. And second, I went to the summer scene this past weekend, and it was really well attended, I thought, and there were a lot of Adirondack chairs this year, probably 30 or so.
Wow.
I did not win, but that's okay. I got a lot of buzz, and there were some really, really creative, beautiful chairs. So it was really a good event, and there was food and entertainment, and I recommend that everybody go next year. It's just a great time, and I think a great addition to the city.
Good. Commissioner Wiggins.
Thanks to staff for putting together the review of previous projects. Lots of great images and information. Thanks for going out and taking recent photos. It's very nice to have those to be able to review. Other than that, that's all I have.
Good. Secretary Crane.
I really like this review. I mean, we haven't done much of that in the past, and I think that, that's something that we probably ought to schedule every year.
Yep. Thank you. Commissioner Meiske.
I agree that with Commissioner Crane. I mean, this is something I think that we should bring up at least once a year, just to go through the comments that, we can get better.
Yep. Well said. Let's see. Commissioner Urquia.
And just echo the last two commissioners' comments, especially as a new commissioner, this is fantastic to kind of be reminded of what's happened here in the city over the last couple of years and kind of see where we've come, and comparing the renderings to the actual locations is I think a great exercise in what impact we're actually having with our conversations on a month-to-month basis. But I thank you so much for taking the pictures. You can see the dates on there. So no, it was recent efforts, but appreciate it because it does kind of bring the whole thing together, and I enjoyed the exercise. So thank you.
Yep. Mayor Turnbow.
I can't say anything more. I would echo what everybody else has said. Great report tonight, guys. Very comprehensive. Appreciate that. Some great thoughts and ideas came out of it, and I appreciate you doing that. And I would encourage that to continue as well. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. I really don't have much to add except thank you to staff. I have said before, and I still don't get tired of saying it, we could not do our job as a commission without your help and support. You all do the legwork, and I think, previous comments about the photographs and all the legwork that went into this review, it's very visible. I don't know if council sees this. I guess maybe it's part of our minutes or something, but if there's an opportunity, seems like certainly would be worth sharing with them, just because it's probably good for us to pat ourselves on the head every now and then, and council being an integral part of the process should be included in that. Other than that, if no one has any other comments, I would entertain a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Urquia, second by Commissioner Wiggins to adjourn. All those in favor, raise a hand, please. And I have 7 in favor, none opposed, no abstentions. Thank you all, and we'll see you in a month, I guess.